666.
We're talking now with Dr. Mark Thompson, Senior Research Fellow and Head of the Socioeconomics Program at the King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies, and author of the book, Being Young Male in Saudi, Identity, Politics in a Globalized Kingdom. Mark, thanks so much for joining us this week.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
Mark, we're just delighted to have you. We talk regularly on this podcast about economic issues, social issues, and it's wonderful to have someone who actually knows what they're talking about on. You've immersed yourself as head of Socioeconomics program at the King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies, which I think most of our listeners and viewers know is really a prestigious institution and well regarded. You've done a number of publications recently. You have Good Jobs and Bad Jobs, Employment Attitudes, Perceptions and Priorities in Saudi Arabia. You published a very interesting book called Being Young Male in Saudi, Identity and Politics in a Globalized Kingdom. And you have an upcoming publication, Governance and Domestic Policymaking in Saudi Arabia, Transforming Society, Economics, Politics, and Culture. These are fascinating issues to us. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing at King Faisal and maybe expand on your methodology? Because I was listening to a video of you talking about all the surveys you did when you wrote the Being Young Male in Saudi book. I'd love to understand what you're doing, what you're trying to get at, and how you're getting at it.
Well, actually, my research focus has remained the same, over many, many years. And that is that, I look at societal transformation. I look at the socioeconomic impact of what we've seen happening over the last couple of decades on young people in Saudi Arabia, because at the end of the day, this is a very young kingdom. This is a very young population. These things impact them. And when you are in conversation with young Saudis of either gender and no matter, all different parts of the kingdom, what they're concerned about, what they want to talk about, they don't really want to talk about the high policy types things, although, of course, at the moment, Ukraine, of course, but, in general, 95% of the time, they want to talk about jobs and they want to talk about careers. They want to talk about education. They want to talk about the pandemic. They want to talk about opportunities and all those sort of topics that fall into, what I often talk about is sort of the area of low politics, but actually those are the things that impact everybody, on people's everyday lives. So I've been looking at these issues for, many, many years, and thank you for mentioning those publications. I mean, those are only just sort of some of the more recent ones. And I've been in Saudi Arabia now since 2001. And and I've worked for multiple institutions, not just the King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies. I mean, I taught politics at King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals for 8 years. I was at the Saudi National Guard. I was at Prince Sultan University. I worked for IFRA, the Aramco project, and I actually started out first came to Saudi Arabia as a teacher for Saudi Arabian Airlines. So, King Fahd Day. So, and my PhD actually came about because of living in Saudi Arabia, not because I read something in a library, and so this is something that's been with me. This is my journey, if you like, ever since I arrived in the kingdom, and of course, you've mentioned the methodology. I mean, Saudi Arabia is one of the most, and always has been, regardless of the recent changes, Saudi Arabia has always been one of the most social societies on earth. I mean, you go to Iraha, you go to the Majlis, you go to the Diwaniyah, you go out with your friends, you go to weddings, you do, it's an incredibly social society where personal connections, friendships, and these things really, really matter. So I have done work in the past, like, for example, my first book where I did extensive one-to-one interviews with about 120 people all across the kingdom. And for sort of the more recent, I suppose from about sort of 10 years ago, the sort of work that, or no longer than that, actually, that I've done sort of with youth. Yes, I do use surveys from time to time, written surveys in Arabic, but actually I only use those to support my main methodology, which is either one-to-one interviews or, more often than not, focus groups. So, for example, being young male in Saudi, I did 55 focus groups all over the kingdom with people from, all walks of life, all constituencies. And my focus, when I do my focus groups, I don't do them in an academic focus group setting. I go to them, we sit in the istiraha, we go to the desert, we sit on the beach, we sit in the park, we sit in the coffee shop, wherever they would normally be. And actually, having the sort of conversations that they would normally be having anyway. Yes. So I don't record. I never record anything because that automatically changes the dynamic, So I just take copious notes from these focus groups, and I end up with 90,000 words of notes from 50 focus groups, which of course turned into the book. So, I understand that it's really, it's so important to have these personal connections, to sit and talk to people, because actually that's actually how people are. It's not what happens in the workshop. It's what, over coffee, over lunch.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really nice to be back. Although it's not like this as well, of course.
Well, this has been quite a tool, and it's been a wonderful thing, especially for our purposes, because we want to get we want it to be a platform for Saudi and non-Saudi experts, but we really want it to be a platform for folks who are in Saudi, and as we move along, more and more younger people.
Yeah, great. And well, I can do with that if you need any assistance with finding younger people, younger Saudis who'd be willing to. I know so many. So
yes, an emphatic yes, because I've been in and out, I've been dealing with Saudi Arabia for 30 years, and I've worked with private sector groups, and we continue to work with a private sector group that's associated with the Federation of Saudi Chambers, and there is nothing more compelling than a Saudi speaking about themselves in Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely. No, this is really, and one of the things I try and do with my work, my papers, my books and things is to actually, sort of be a conduit, as it were, for these voices, to voices that otherwise don't get heard because they're not elites, because, they didn't get a PhD from Harvard, or because they left school and went straight into employment. But their voices are as important as anybody else's, and my work, that's what I try and do with my work.
Agreed. And let me just forewarn you right now, because I want to be polite. One of the first emails, communications after we're done with this, is me coming to you and saying, Mark, yes, who would you recommend we get in touch with to talk to?
Yeah, sure, no problem. Yeah, there's a lot of very interesting people who are not on the list, if you know what I mean, because. Yeah, and but they're young, they're up and coming, they're starting to mark in their own particular sectors or their fields, and incredibly interesting people, and so no, I can definitely give you quite a lot of names of people.
Excellent.
Male and female, of course.
That's it. Yeah, that's even better. And that's one of this format we found, and we've been hacking away at the relationship for a long time, and we have a well-respected newsletter. But moving into this format, we found a real thirst for it. I mean, what we're doing is fairly unique. It's informal, but it's informed, and we drawing from a lot of different expertise. So there's nothing else out there really like that, and we want to keep going with. Sharing voices, just like you said.
Yes.
Otherwise wouldn't be heard.
No, exactly. And I think, this is the silver lining to the pandemic in a way, is that, we have, like us at the center, we, at the number of events and the number of lectures and seminars and whatever that we do is increased exponentially because, we've moved a lot of online and we're keeping it online, of course. Yeah. We're back person, but we're also keeping this other side that we were sort of forced to do because of the pandemic.
And there's very few. Saudi Arabia is a very welcoming in-person culture.
Yes.
Yes. So it's very interesting to see. I'm sure everybody there is racing to just get back and hang out with each other.
I mean, fortunately, the pandemic did not affect Saudi Arabia as badly as many other places. Of course, the government, their government response to the pandemic was very, very good. The tech is fantastic, and the government messaging was very clear. As somebody who comes from a country where there was no government messaging, I mean, hello.
Yeah, exactly. We regularly express our envy.
Well, no, I mean, this is, there is no doubt, that there is no doubt that they handled this extremely well. But then, of course, they had coronavirus in 2012 and 2015 with MERS. And also, extremely importantly, they have Hajj every year.
Mm-hmm.
And every year, the Ministry of Health and everybody are constantly monitoring who's coming in from where. I remember when Ebola was the big problem,
Right.
in West. And the authorities here were so concerned that something could come in at Hajj, So because of that awareness, and I think that awareness was so important, they realized, very early on that, wait, this is serious, and we have to deal with that seriously.
It was Saudi Arabia is uniquely well positioned. I mean, when you look at and Lucia and I have talked about this on previous episodes, when you look at some of the components that were necessary to successfully deal with the pandemic, it's helpful to have an authoritarian government. It's helpful to have the means, financial means. It's really helpful to have that, just as you say, that experience and the habit of following the science.
Yes.
And it's also they were very disciplined and rigorous, and they stuck it through. So I mean, they really brought everything you could possibly bring.
We're very lucky to have a very competent Minister of Health when it started.
Right.
It was a competent minister, had been a minister in other portfolios, who is highly respected within Saudi society and across the Saudi society, who also knows how to communicate, which I think.
We know Dr. Tawfiq from when he was Minister of Commerce, and he's a capable guy.
He is, and he's a very approachable person, and he's a very straightforward person as well.
Yeah.
So I think, to have somebody like him, in that position was really important, and the fact that the king basically said to him, "Whatever you want," was
there you go.
And what's I think what really said it all was that the first person to be vaccinated live on television, on social media, and all of those things was not the king, was not the crown prince. It was Dr. Tawfiq.
There you go.
Yes, and that's what I mean. They got the messaging right here, they got the tech right. And I think that even though people grumbled about certainly the curfew in 2020, which was, of course, as you know, was extremely strict, and even though people grumbled about it at the time, in retrospect, of course, there's a huge realization that actually, that really was the right thing to do.
We're hoping to have. We've already got him as a spokesperson and sort of the head researcher over at the Saudi Data and AI Agency, who developed Tawakalna.
Excellent.
And to talk about that, because as you say, I mean, this is one of the benefits that came along. It's something that's like Abshur. It's like everyday life for a Saudi or for anybody there.
Tawakalna, of course, now has a completely different role from just being, a coronavirus COVID application. Now you have your Igama, your driving license, everything is on Tawakalna now.
Right.
And the majority of people actually are saying, well, this is great because actually it just makes life so much easier for everyone.
Replaces the wallet and
yeah. Seriously.
I think Mada payment scheme is the next thing to go on.
Nice.
So I heard yesterday.
Well,
yes.
Let me cut in here, guys. I'm just going to do a quick introduction to you, Mark, and then we'll just jump right back into the conversation because this is all good and we want to include as much of it as we can. And then, so the way this will work is I'll just do a short introduction and then Richard's going to follow up to it and then we can just talk. And it's a podcast, so whatever comes out will be what we use. So we'll just go with that. Great. Richard, and you're ready and recording on your side as well?
I am recording.
Okay, cool. We're talking now with Dr. Mark Thompson, Senior Research Fellow and Head of the Socioeconomics Program at the King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies, and author of the book, Being Young Male and Saudi, Identity, Politics in a Globalized Kingdom. Mark, thanks so much for joining us this week.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
Mark, we're just delighted to have you. We talk regularly on this podcast about economic issues, social issues, and it's wonderful to have someone who actually knows what they're talking about on. I mean, you've immersed yourself as head of Socioeconomics program at the King Faisal Center for Research Islamic Studies, which I think most of our listeners and viewers know is really a prestigious institution and well regarded. You've done a number of publications recently. You have Good Jobs and Bad Jobs, Employment Attitudes, Perceptions and Priorities in Saudi Arabia. You published a very interesting book called Being Young, Male and Saudi, Identity and Politics in a Globalized Kingdom. And you have an upcoming publication, Governance and Domestic Policymaking in Saudi Arabia, Transforming Society, Economics, Politics, and Culture. These are fascinating issues to us. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing at King Faisal and maybe expand on your methodology? Because I was listening to a video of you talking about all the surveys you did when you wrote the Being Young, Male and Saudi book. I'd love to understand what you're doing, what you're trying to get at, and how you're getting at it.
Well, actually, my research focus has remained the same, over many, many years. And that is that, I look at societal transformation. I look at the sort of the socioeconomic impact of what we've seen happening over the last couple of decades on young people in Saudi Arabia, because at the end of the day, this is a very young kingdom. This is a very young population. These things impact them. And when you are in conversation with young Saudis of either gender and no matter, all different parts of the kingdom, what they're concerned about, what they want to talk about, they don't really want to talk about the high policy types things, although of course at the moment Ukraine, of course, but in general, 95% of the time they want to talk about jobs, and they want to talk about careers, they want to talk about education, they want to talk about the pandemic, they want to talk about opportunities, and all those sort of topics that fall into what I often talk about as sort of the area of low politics, but actually those are the things that impact everybody on people's everyday lives. So I've been looking at these issues for many years, and thank you for mentioning those publications. I mean, those are only just sort of some of the more recent ones. And I've been in Saudi Arabia now since 2001. And I think, and I've worked for multiple institutions, not just the King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies. I mean, I taught politics at King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals for 8 years. I was at the Saudi National Guard. I was at Prince Sultan University. I worked for IFRA, the Aramco project, and I actually started out in my first came to Saudi Arabia as a teacher for Saudi Arabian Airlines. So, King Fahd Day. So, I mean, and my PhD actually came about because of living in Saudi Arabia, not because I read something in a library, and so this is something that's been with me. This is my journey, if you like, ever since I arrived in the kingdom, and of course, you've mentioned the methodology. I mean, Saudi Arabia is one of the most, and always has been, regardless of the recent changes, Saudi Arabia has always been one of the most social societies on earth. I mean, you go to Raha, you go to the Majlis, you go to the Diwaniya, you go out with your friends, you go to weddings, it's an incredibly social society where personal connections, friendships, and these things really, really matter. So I have done work in the past, like, for example, my first book, where I did extensive one-to-one interviews with about 120 people all across the kingdom. And for sort of the more recent, I suppose from about sort of 10 years ago, the sort of work that, or no longer than that, actually, that I've done sort of with youth. Yes, I do use surveys from time to time, written surveys in Arabic, but actually I only use those to support my main methodology, which is either one-to-one interviews or, more often than not, focus groups. So, for example, Being Young, Male and Saudi, I did 55 focus groups all over the kingdom with people from all walks of life, all constituencies. And when I do my focus groups, I don't do them in an academic focus group setting. I go to them, we sit in the istiraha, we go to the desert, we sit on the beach, we sit in the park, we sit in the coffee shop, wherever they would normally be. And actually having the sort of conversations that they would normally be having anyway. Yes. Mm-hmm. So I don't record. I never record anything because that automatically changes the dynamic. So I just take copious notes from these focus groups, and I end up with 90,000 words of notes from 50 focus groups, which of course turned into the book. So I understand that it's really it's so important to have these personal connections, to sit and talk to people, because actually that's actually how people are much more comfortable. And in a focus group, having these very informal discussion focus groups, it allows for disagreement, it allows for contradictions, it allows for nuance, it allows for gray areas to emerge, because we here in Saudi Arabia are in the midst of this transition at the moment. It's still ongoing, and transitions by their very nature are messy and uneven, and they go forward, they go backwards, or here being Saudi Arabia, they go sideways, they go diagonally, whatever. And you can't put things into sort of neat little boxes and say, this is this and this is this. There are complexities, there are contradictions, there is this nuance and everything. And to get to try and capture that, you need to sit to talk to people. You need to understand what their perceptions are, what their concerns are, what their aspirations are, what maybe they don't understand as well, maybe what they haven't even thought about sometimes. And you can only really do that, I find, here in the kingdom in those sort of informal settings. I think when it comes to methodology, research methodology, you don't try and force your research methodology onto a particular group or a particular context. Rather, you adapt yourself to the context that you're operating in. And that's how that's what I do, and that's how I get the results that I get a lot of the time. And if I do something like a survey, I simply do that as a way of supporting what my qualitative research is telling me.
Mm-hmm. I've always been fascinated by Saudi Arabia because of this sort of one-of-a-kind, extraordinary experiment of trying to transition from traditional to modern while remaining authentic and retaining important traditions that people feel strongly about and want to continue. So even without Vision 2030, Saudi Arabia would be fascinating.
Yes.
But now you have this overlay of the King Salman and the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman have brought into play beginning in April 2016. That we've watched from day one, even before it came in. We remember the McKinsey reports coming out in late December 2015, this is what's coming and that sort of thing. And we've seen it build momentum. We've seen skepticism. We've seen where we now to a point where we've seen real change, fundamental transformation at the granular level. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And as you say, affecting no demographic more than youth. What are you seeing? I think this is something that really infuses your work, is that the Vision 2030 and youth.
Well, Vision 2030 was in many ways a response to what was already happening bottom up. The changes were already ongoing. And a lot of the catalyst for that, of course, was in particular the 2014 oil crash, which had enormous impact on, for example, the employment market in Saudi Arabia. So I used to work at King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals at that time, pre-2014. The graduates who, of course, are best in the kingdom, they were getting 6-7 job offers, and then that happened, and that went to none overnight almost. And that changed, that started to change the mentalities and started to change the conversation and the discourse. And also in terms of, the entertainment side and what have you. As you know, there was nothing before, or hardly anything. But of course, young people being young people, and lots of very smart entrepreneurial aspirational young people like the kingdom has, they were sort of starting, they were making their own things up. They were looking at what was officially there and saying, well, they're not doing anything for us, so we'll just go ahead and do it ourselves. And that's what they were doing. So, I could see that, the combination of those two things was at some point going to have to force something somewhere. So long time before Vision 2030, I remember saying to somebody very high up, he was telling me that, there were going to be these programs, because I was asking him he said to me, what are the three most important things in Saudi Arabia, in your opinion? And I said, that's easy, youth, youth, youth. And, he said, oh, but we've got this program, we've got this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. And I said, I had to stop him. And I said, look, it's as though we're on a train station at the moment. And the train that you're talking about, youth, has gone. It's gone, and it's up to you to catch up with them, not the other way around,
Yeah.
And then you add to that, of course, the 2009 sort of social media revolution, and how that, the fact that, young Saudis are, online 24/7, as with 3-4 smartphones and what have you. So all of this is sort of building pressure, if you like. And so, Vision 2030 was sort of replying to this, was responding to this. And you knew that something like that had to happen. So when I was in Riyadh at the time, watching when His Royal Highness made the announcement in April 2016, sitting with young Saudis, of course, to see how they responded to this. And of course, they were incredibly excited, because all of a sudden, somebody was actually talking to them about what they wanted to hear, and somebody, who wasn't 80, which was a huge change. And I think in terms of the vision, I mean, there's a lot, as you said, there's been a lot of skepticism, and there's been a lot of criticism and what have you. And, I frequently, if I'm outside the kingdom, I have people talking to me about this, and they will say to me, well, what about this program? Do you think it's going to succeed? And what about this? Is it going to succeed? And is this part of the vision going to succeed, et cetera, et cetera? And, my response to them is that actually you've got the wrong end of the stick here, because what you're talking about are specific national transformation program projects. You're not talking about the vision. The vision is precisely that, a vision, and it's intangible. Yes. And therefore, if you look at Saudi Arabia today and you ask yourself, has the vision succeeded? The answer is yes, it has already succeeded, because it's changed this. It's changed the way that young people think. It's changed the way that young people see their futures, how they see opportunities, how they see careers, how they see that living their lives. I mean, and that's just an enormous change. I mean, I was with some of the students I taught at King Fahd University of Petroleum a couple of months ago, and I keep up with hundreds and hundreds of my former students, and a lot of them are in Riyadh, of course, now. And we were talking about when I taught them in 2013, and they were saying to me, yes, back then, our lives were pretty much set. It was, graduate, join Aramco, retire, die, and, and whilst that's there's a joke, there's a lot of truth in that,
especially coming out of KFUPM, yeah,
there's a lot of truth in that. Whereas now, there's so many other opportunities. There's so many different types of things they can do. I mean, every single young Saudi I know seems to have some sort of startup, whether it's a coffee shop, whether it's selling something online, along with their full-time job, whether it's a juice bar, I don't know. I mean, and this is a huge change. And talk with this same group of students as well, who I met, who now work for STC and PIF and all of these places. And, I said to them, when you studied with me in 2013, we had 3 classes of, 45 students, whatever. And I said, then in 2013, out of those 3 classes, the 120 odd students, how many students either had a part-time job or volunteered? And they said, well, probably nobody. 1, 2, maybe. I said, well, today, if you looked at that sort of same number, how many would have a part-time job or volunteer? 70%, 80%? You know, that's a massive change in attitudes and mentality. And you know, and a part-time job might just be working as a clean driver for a couple of hours a week, you know, or whatever. But you know, this is what we've seen happen. And you know, in a society where, as I said, you know, the very sort of, you know, sort of a community society where people are, you know, always in groups and always talking, you know, then obviously, you know, you used to get sort of Ahmed and Abdullah sort of saying, oh, well, you know, we've just started a food truck, or we've just started volunteering at MISC, or, you know, we're doing this, or what have you. And of course, you know, then the others in the group say, oh, yeah, you know, that sounds like fun. You know, why don't we do that? You know, and of course, that not just sounds like fun, but it also sounds like a good opportunity to, you know, meet certain people that we wouldn't have otherwise. Anyone, you know? Yeah.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the mentalities have changed, the ways of thinking about things have changed. And I think particularly when you're looking at the sort of the socioeconomic sphere, you know, the huge changes that have happened there in terms of how people think about employment, how people think about careers, you know, sociocultural, I think, is quite different at times. But yes, I mean, it's been something of a revolution, actually. And, you know, I work now at King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies. You know, we have lots of very bright young female researchers, junior researchers who I work with on a daily basis, you know, who come to my office for advice and things like this. And, you know, there was a time when I would have been arrested if that had happened.
Yes.
Yes.
Indeed.
So, you know, the first 7 years I was here, I never spoke to a Saudi woman. You know, so, you know, these are really huge changes, seismic changes, but these are very positive changes. And I remember last Ramadan when the Crown Prince gave his interview on Ratana in Arabic. It was at 11 p.m. in the evening, which of course was perfect time in Ramadan.
Exactly.
And very interesting because on Takht Street, you know, all the coffee shops were rammed full of people, and, you know, the football was on, and then they turned it over to watch the Crown Prince give his interview. And of course, it was fascinating because he talked about, you know, predominantly about the cost of living and employment, VAT, and these sort of low political things. But I actually went to my office because our junior researchers because it was Ramadan, they were working in the evenings rather than the day. And one of the female junior researchers came into my office and said, oh, Dr. Mark, are you in for the whole evening? And I said, no, unfortunately, I'm actually off to get a vaccination this evening. But she said, we, meaning the young female employees, whether they work in public relations, whether they're researchers or what have you, had arranged to sort of have a sort of mini party in one of the meeting rooms to watch the Crown Prince's interview. And I thought, there you go. There's your video.
Just extraordinary. And to thank you, Mark. I mean, that's really exciting to hear someone who's witnessing this firsthand and paying such close attention. I agree with you, and we often refer to November 2014 in that OPEC meeting when essentially Saudi Arabia, it became very clear that Saudi Arabia had to change its course. And but as you say, it was being pulled along by forces already in train. And but let me get you mentioned something, and maybe if you can untangle a little bit. You said the difference between socioeconomic and sociocultural.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that is that I think Saudi Arabia's core identity narrative, in other words, Islam and family, are still right at the center of life in the kingdom, are still essentially what it means to be somebody from this country. And, you know, to what extent since 2016, since the launch of the vision, have we seen sort of fundamental change there? Well, I don't think we have. I think those have remained constant, you know. And when I say Islam here, I'm talking not about religion, I'm talking about faith. You know, I'm talking about people's faith, their relationship with Allah, with God, with Islam, you know. And has that changed? No. Has the role of the family fundamentally changed? No, I don't think so. I certainly don't see it in my daily life, unless I'm traveling with Saudi friends on a Friday. Maybe we're going on a trip or something. I never see any Saudi friend ever between 11 a.m. and 4 or 5 p.m. on a Friday. Never, because you don't do that. So I think, there are those fundamental core identity narratives within that sort of sociocultural identity realm that remain constant. Whereas a lot of the socioeconomic changes, we're seeing rapid changes and huge changes, and like I said, changes that I never envisaged seeing. And I think sometimes we have to sort of maybe differentiate between where things are happening.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're the Saudi Brain Trust, you're the Al Saud, and you're the government, isn't that exactly the balance you want to achieve?
Yes, of course it is. I mean, and this is very important, because it's incredibly important. You've got to, you need to maintain what it is that makes the kingdom. You need to maintain, because this is also incredibly important to individuals, to families, to tribes, to regions, whatever. Yes, absolutely. People talk about, when they talk about Riyadh season, and they sort of talk about Boulevard, or sort of those types of Riyadh season events, if you like, you don't get as many people talking about Zaman Village. Yes. Mm-hmm. And yet Zaman, the heritage part, and yet on the several times that I went there, it was packed, absolutely packed, for poetry recitals, for traditional music and things like this. And that's the same with similar events that I've been to all around the kingdom, I went to the Uneza Spring Flower Festival, for example. And, I think it is very important, because you also want to make sure that that these things are compatible with, people's own sense of their identity, of who they are, and compatible with people's heritage, with people's understanding of themselves. Very, very important.
A little sidebar, we covered Founding Day and the origins of Founding Day, the philosophy behind Founding Day, and the actual implementation of Founding Day. But a little sidebar, one of the interesting things was, it really looked like in the celebrations, people really enjoyed coming out in traditional garb. There was a whole array. It was like a fashion show of women and men dressed as their great grandparents were dressed. Yeah.
And my WhatsApp was just going crazy all day long, with everybody sending me photographs of themselves dressed up. This is me and my family, and talks about having a party today where we're all dressing up, all 350 of us. And yes, no, very much. And I think it was, what was fascinating about that as well was it was an opportunity that so many people seem to enjoy, to celebrate, not just to celebrate their family history, their tribal history, their origins, and hence the costumes and things like that. And people at Boulevard dressed as flower men from Jizan and everything.
Right.
I thought it was great. I thought it was lovely, and because I think when people talk about Saudi Arabia outside the kingdom, or when Saudi Arabia is discussed, it tends to be discussed in a very sort of general way. It tends to be treated as though it's this one huge homogenous society, and people talk about Saudi women, as though they're one great big group that goes everywhere together, and yet actually, this is a very, very diverse kingdom, in terms of its population, in terms of the geography, in terms of the heritage, and of course there are things that connect everybody. But you also have these wonderful sort of individual sort of cultural heritages around the kingdom, and I think celebrating that is lovely, and it's very important. And Founding Day, from that point of view, was very interesting, because it actually highlighted some of this as well, which was very enjoyable. And it was nice to see that it was, that it was not just celebrated here, but it was noticed as well outside the kingdom.
Well, we found as I said, Saudi Arabia is a constant fascination. It's an ongoing experiment, and it was just, it's so interesting in terms of establishing a national myth. And this is not a derogatory thing, but a narrative for a country. And you see, as you say, constantly, you've said it's a young country, even though it has origins going way back. But it is a young country. But introducing and reinforcing this narrative, which substantiates going forward as well what Saudi Arabia wants to see changed and what they want to achieve. Let me, Mark, if I can just go off on a little tangent. One of the things, speaking to perceptions from the West, you're exactly right. And this one of our purposes of this show is to try and unpack things and introduce a little nuance and context, because it's almost like a reaction. People in the West don't want anything nuanced. They want it, NEOM is this and oil policy is this and so on and so forth. But I see this a little bit, this recent interview that the Crown Pitch did with The Atlantic, and I see the titles about what it was. But if you read the transcript of the whole interview, it's quite fascinating, and part of that discussion is something that I think is important going on in Saudi Arabia, and speaks to what you're talking about, the faith and Saudi's commitment to maintaining these traditions and how they feel about their faith. But his discussion about what they want to see in terms of reorienting in terms of Islam, not a moderate Islam. He said, do not use that term, but the type of Islam that prevailed in Saudi Arabia traditionally. And does this resonate with Saudi youth?
Yes, I mean, of course it does. I mean, it resonates in terms of, as I say, I mean, I always used to teach my students, the difference between religion and faith. The fact that religion is the sort of the political side, if you like. So I always used to teach them that. And of course, what you see, Saudi Arabia is without a doubt, in my opinion, a much happier place today in general. In terms of when you go out, because you don't have this sort of worry about having to look over your shoulder all the time as you used to have to in the past. Right. You're not sort of being, you haven't got people sort of hectoring you about, you've got to go and pray, you've got to do this or what have you, which of course people resented, because, it's like, you don't need to tell me to go and do that, because it's something that I do anyway. Yes. So no. People, I think that sort of, that pressure that was taken away was definitely welcomed. But again, it hasn't altered people's own faith, because that's been constant, throughout the time that I've been here. And it's constant with all the friends that I'm with, all my Saudi friends. So no, I mean, I think that is something that people feel, is an improvement, because it's sort of made the situation sort of more relaxed, and it sort of means that you haven't got that sort of, as I say, people looking over your shoulder, as it were.
Right. Lucian, I don't want to preempt you, because we were talking about questions beforehand, and Lucian made this very good point about the then King Abdullah scholarships, now custodian of the two holy mosques. And should I go ahead, Lucian? Or
Yeah. Go ahead.
And we've always commented, when this was introduced in 2005, and we've worked with the Saudi Cultural Mission here, and we sort of have followed the program. We've always commented it is one of the most creative and subversive programs, ever introduced by a country. Bringing this hundreds of thousands of students, both to the U.S. and elsewhere across the globe, and having them study and learn and create affinities in Western countries, and then come back to Saudi Arabia. Just an extraordinary experiment, extraordinary initiative. Have you seen the same thing?
Oh gosh, yes, absolutely. So I remember going to a seminar in London many years ago. I think it was when King Abdullah was in London for the G20, and the then British ambassador to Saudi Arabia was there, along with all the past British ambassadors to Saudi Arabia. And there was talking obviously about the King Abdullah Scholarship Program, and the point was made then that, of course, in Saudi Arabia at that time, you had the top, you had the bottom, but you didn't really have any sort of intermediate stratum. it was non-existent. Well, it exists today, and many people, over the years would sort of talk to me about the King Abdullah Scholarship Program, sort of say, well, what's happening? Is everything happening? Whatever. And I always used to say to them, wait.
Yes.
These people have got to graduate, they've got to return. And of course, the fascinating thing about this is that the vast majority of them all do come back, and always have done. And then they have to start feeding into the system and then start sort of rising up through the system. Well, this is happening. Now, when I first started at KFUPM, there were not many Saudi assistant professors. There are tons now. And it's the same at King Saud or whatever university you go to. You go to the ministries. I sometimes go to some of these major ministries and I'm walking around the building thinking, well, I must be the oldest person here. So, the fact that also 50% are women as well, and so they, and now, the fact that so many of these people are now in decision-making positions, not just in public sector, obviously, but also in the private sector as well. Yes, it's been in my opinion, it's been a huge success because it created that intermediate stratum, and it created, a whole generation or a couple of generations of Saudis who the government has been able to benefit from. Because at the end of the day, I've always said this, Saudi Arabia's greatest asset is not oil, it's its people. It's its young people. Think about, how much would Japan like to have Saudi Arabia's population, or some of the European countries? Well, exactly. Exactly. So, and I think we have to point out as well that it wasn't just the King Abdullah Scholarship Program. It was also the money that was spent on, sort of the domestic education,
right,
as the Princess Noura University, KAUST, places like KFUPM, vocational colleges, what have you, the enormous expenditure on education right across the board. Of course, again, it's been uneven, and, we can debate about what educational reforms have worked and whether, the ongoing reforms are successful or not, because it's always been a very, contentious topic. But without a doubt, the combination of this has created this young, aspirational, by and large, well-educated population. It's it's extraordinary. I taught for 30 years, not just here, but in many other countries around the world, and the best students I ever had were the students at King Fahd University of Petroleum, and I had thousands of them, and they were, 10% of them were exceptional, and are now in quite major decision-making positions, a lot of them. So the country had and has so much potential, and so King Abdullah was, he was absolutely right to realize that you had to tap into this potential. You have to, give it direction. You have to. It was extremely successful.
Well, maybe this doesn't. We can't go back this far, but when we cover all the economic diversification efforts, and when you talk about Lucid, creating a manufacturing plant in King Abdullah Economic City, you talk about growing the military industrial base. Talk about 200,000 jobs from mining and minerals and that sort of thing. These are prospective jobs for Saudis primarily. And this is maybe where your admonitions, they say, wait, comes into place. Has the educational system, I'm talking not at KFUPM level, which is the high flyers.
Yes.
But K through 12 and maybe vocational, has that, how long will it take for that to start turning out really capable and employable young Saudis?
It already is. And I know this from a fact from, various companies that I've talked to for many, many years, who will tell you, for example, who employ technicians and things like this, who would tell you, 10, 15 years ago, they wouldn't dream of employing Saudi technicians. And now they say our best technicians are young Saudis, So it's already happening. Of course, there is still a long way to go, because you simply cannot do these things overnight. They do take time. you have to change the way people think. You have to change people's, attitudes to employment, the types of jobs that Saudis were willing to do and things like that, because we went through that period where, it was always, oh no, Saudis don't do certain jobs, but that's changing very much. So no, I mean, I do, there are a lot of challenges. There are going to be bumps in the roads, and there are going to be obstacles, but by and large, I think they can be overcome. And I think sometimes, it does, you're absolutely right. I mean, at the end of the day, whenever you look at these problems, when you look at these challenges, you sort of then start stepping back, then yes, it goes back to education, without a doubt. And I think a lot of the, it's no good introducing this in tertiary education. It needs to come much, much further in advance.
Right.
Mm. And of course, one of the problems that they've had in Saudi Arabia for a long time, which is acknowledged and discussed, is the fact that all of these students would sort of, go through the education system, and then those that were going to go into tertiary education, male and female, would end up spending a year in orientation before they actually started their university program, because they do the orientation, because they didn't do it, they wouldn't actually be ready to go into university. And of course, that's ridiculous. And that's been, that's acknowledged here, within the education ministry and everything, that's ridiculous. You can't have that anymore. And the orientation programs and things like that need to become things of the past. There's no doubt that a great many challenges remain. But, I think, going back to what you just said about the introduction of the King Abdullah Scholarship Program, or what I just said about going to that seminar in 2008, and then if you map how things have changed since then to now, I mean, it's actually an enormous change in really a relatively short space of time.
I'm always stunned and amazed when people try and use the metric of, so for example, the Aramco IPO didn't reach $2 trillion. It wasn't a success. There's no bearing on what exactly that was about.
No.
Same thing, just as you referred earlier, the transitions, they do have all these metrics, all these KPIs, all this sort of thing, and it's very aspirational, but that's not the point.
No.
And I think you captured it brilliantly when you talked about, what it's done to us, the Saudi mind. And
2030 is not the point.
Right.
20 is just a date, and it's just a date and a branding. That's that's what it is. It's branding. But this isn't going to suddenly all stop in 2030. And not everything, and I think, not everything's going to succeed, and some things will succeed spectacularly well, some things maybe moderately, some things won't. But, I've heard, again, I remember going to the Miss Global Forum a couple of years ago, where there were several ministers there who were sort of having a sort of conversation between themselves in the audience and on the stage about all of this, which was fascinating. And it was really interesting to hear them say, actually, we understand that some of this is trial and error, because we haven't actually done this before, and so therefore not everything is going to go right necessarily, because a lot of it's new.
We're huge fans of Dr. Majid Al-Kassabi, who's the Minister of Commerce and also acting Minister of Media, but in general, just an all-round tremendous individual. But
ministers having that conversation.
I'm not surprised at all. He came and visited, I don't know, this was probably 2017, 2018 or whatever, and he was over speaking at Center for Strategic International Studies, and we had helped arrange that. And it was so refreshing and so necessary, saying, look, this isn't a straight line. This is two steps up and one step back. And I think people need to understand that. So, Dr. Majid has always been very straightforward about that, because that's the kind of guy he is.
Yeah. This Saudi Arabia, 2 steps forward, 2 steps sideways.
and by the way, it makes perfect sense to everybody why.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, as I said, this is the nature of a transition, and you're going to, it's because you're dealing with people, so things are going to be uneven and things are going to, be different and maybe not work out the way that you necessarily think they are. I mean, I was talking to some sort of quite senior policymakers not that long ago, and I said, I think sometimes what people forget, and maybe they should be thinking about it a little bit more, is that policies can be formulated and they can be implemented, and actually it might be a very good policy, it might be something that's very beneficial, but it doesn't mean that societies or communities in the kingdom necessarily interpret them the way they were meant to be interpreted. And that's something that we sort of see happening as well, where various groups of people, the kids say, oh yeah, this is great, and we're going to do this, but it's not necessarily what was planned.
As I've always said, it's an experiment and it gets messy, but
exactly, it is an experiment, and experiments are always messy, and I think as well, when you have so much happening on so many different levels simultaneously, that it is difficult sometimes to keep track of what's going on, but it necessarily, that's going to happen. And we're all quite glad actually that Ramadan is coming up in a couple of weeks' time, because it's sort of going to be sort of an opportunity to just sort of let everything settle for a little while.
And it'll be the first normal Ramadan in 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean, last Ramadan was reasonably normal, wasn't? Yeah, but yes, so I think everybody's sort of looking forward to that, and obviously, like everywhere in the world, I mean, everybody's obviously very relieved that we seem to be sort of transitioning out of the worst of COVID.
Yeah,
a great relief for everybody everywhere.
Yes. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
Mark, I've got a question. So I think one thing that is difficult for us here in the United States, around the world, people looking at Saudi Arabia from the outside, is the lack of public polling. And there just really isn't a lot of it, but you are doing it really in a focused way. I mean, with focus groups, you're talking to young Saudis all the time. And you've probably talked to hundreds for your previous book, and you're a professor.
Thousands. Yes.
Is there thousands? Is there something that you can take when you talk to these young Saudis, one overarching thing that they want, that they agree on, that they all sort of see as important for their future?
Yes, to be engaged, to be consulted, to be able to participate. They have opinions, and that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you are a KFUPM chemical engineering graduate, or whether you're a Toyota car salesman in Oneza, or whether you are just a National Guard soldier somewhere. They have opinions, and they want to be listened to, and they want to feel that they matter, and they want to feel that they can be engaged. And people often ask me, what is the biggest change that I've seen since I first came in January 2001? And that's an easy question to answer. It's the desire to engage. It's huge. And so and I think, and that's obviously, that plays very much to my benefit, because with the type of research that I'm doing, which is very focused on young people and the socioeconomic issues that affect young people, what have you. So I find it very easy to do the type of research that I do, because they want to talk about it. They want to sit down and have these conversations. And in fact, I have these conversations daily with the young people I work with, or certainly several times a week when we go out for dinner with various people. And and we're having these conversations all the time, which of course is also very healthy in my opinion, and it's very encouraging to see that there is a lot of optimism amongst these young people. There is a lot of desire to engage, to participate, to contribute, whether that's to their own personal development, or to their, for the benefit of their family, or whether their community, or on a larger scale, the country, or the company they're working for. That's something that's very positive. But I think that there is an issue that's very important, that's linked to this. and there is at times a lack of mentoring, which is actually very, very necessary. I mean, one thing I noticed with the large numbers of young people that I've engaged with over the years is that many of them, the majority of them, I would say, want to be mentored, even though they don't know they do, because they're 18, 19, 21. So I think that that's something that's lacking still to a certain degree, that needs to be improved. And the other thing linked to that needs to be improved is career guidance, which is a lot of the time is non-existent. So it's not it's not necessarily that young Saudis don't want to do that job. It's they don't even know that job exists. Mm-hmm. And nobody's ever told them about working in this sector or that sector or what that could be. So I think, going back to the education question we were just talking about before, I think this is something that needs to be incorporated, again, not in tertiary education, but in secondary education, which is more mentoring, more career guidance, a lot more information about the jobs of the future, what is going to be available, not now, but what is going to be available in a decade or something like this. And I think that's critical, given, again, the demographics. But the desire to engage is there, and it's exciting and it's positive, and it's great fun as well.
It's fascinating to hear those descriptions, because the rest of the world looks at Saudis sort of as an otherness, a strangeness, inaccessibility. And then when you talk about their youth being, seeking to be engaged and consulted and participate, have their opinions, and then the very, very familiar needing mentoring but not quite really knowing how to get it. They sound like youth all over the world.
Well, if you read the introduction to Being Young, Male and Saudi, one of the things I stress in the introduction is that these young men's concerns are no different from young men's concerns all over the world. Getting a job, having enough money to buy a house, to get married, things like this. It's universal. A lot of these things are universal, and I think it's very. Of course, the context is different, of course, but I think it's very important to get that message across, to sort of try and get rid of this, as you say, this sort of otherness, this sort of, Saudi Arabia, this very strange place over there, but at the end of the day, the kingdom is an incredibly important country, where it's located, the home of Islam, leader of the Arab world, all of these types of things, and however you look at it, it's an incredibly important country that, in my opinion, is only going to get more important into the future. And yet, I talk to a lot of policymakers, say, for example, if I'm back in the United Kingdom, I might be talking to a lot of policymakers, and they know more about Belgium than they do about Saudi Arabia. No offense to Belgium, but they do. But actually, you need to know more about this very dynamic country.
Mark, you've offended Belgium, which is actually a very important EU country. I tend to offend Ghana for whatever reason. I don't know why, because I always say, there's a reason we talk about Saudi Arabia. There's a reason we talk about Saudi Arabia's on the front pages. There's a reason Saudi Arabia always ends up in the mix in so many different scenarios, as opposed to a place like Ghana. So anyway,
or Belgium,
or Belgium.
Going on from here, we'll swap. You use Belgium.
There you go.
Well, and I think we should probably close. But Mark, I wanted to say, when you talked about being young Saudi and male, one of the very endearing things you discussed was their curiosity with marriage, and
yes.
and I just thought it was like I said, it was endearing. It was very human.
Yes, and also because until you're married in the kingdom, you're not really fully part of society. Well, no, you're not. I mean, it is a. I mean, during the pandemic, in Saudi Arabia, the main concern was sort of, when can we get back to having weddings and going to wedding parties? What pubs are in the UK, so no, it's an incredibly important part of life, and so getting married is just something that you have to do, and it's family expectations and all of these types of things. So it's no surprise that when you sit down with young men, you don't have to be writing a book, but when you sit down with young men, at some stage, the conversation will turn to, getting married, because it's that sort of milestone that, when you get to a certain age, is going to happen. But, attitudes to, pretty much everybody I know, and all the I've been to hundreds of weddings over the years, but they're pretty much all traditional weddings. People get married in the traditional way. I was at one just recently in Abu Arish, outside Jizan, and people get married in the traditional way because, again, it all goes back to these powerful identity narratives, this sense of this is what we do, and the sense of the importance of family and all of this. I think sometimes when we talk about Saudi Arabia, we tend to talk about change too much at the moment. And actually, we shouldn't be talking about change. We should be talking about things adapting. And this is what we see, for example, with marriage, whereas the traditional way of marriage is still prevalent, but it's adapting in that now, people can get to know each other, before they get married, to find out whether they're compatible or not compatible, and this is very much now part of how things are done. Yes. But weddings are, an incredibly important part of Saudi social life, as anybody who knows the kingdom will tell you. And depending on where you go in the kingdom, of course, goes to some pretty spectacular weddings as well.
But we've been talking to the brilliant Dr. Mark Thompson. Follow him on Twitter at ThompsonMarkC. He's got a new book coming out as well. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. This was really fascinating.
Oh, no, thank you very much. I really appreciate having the opportunity.